The contextual emphasis of this series: the African cosmology worldview and African traditional religion. It is impossible to talk about African traditional religion and not also talk about the African worldview, since they are intrinsically connected to the point that it is difficult to discern where one stops and the other begins. From the Western perspective, our tendency to divide things up and create dualistic categories allows us to distinguish between religion and worldview, and to see that there could be a worldview that is devoid of religion. This point is debatable because everyone's religion informs their worldview, and those who claim to not have a religion in the West often speak in religious terms about their lack of religion. However, in African cosmology, ATR, and worldview are so intertwined that they must be dealt with together, and it is difficult to determine which one beget the other. Additionally, ATR is difficult to define because it is not a religion like other religions. There is no sacred text like Christianity's Bible or Islam's Quran. There is nothing codified or written down that establishes the basic tenets of ATR. There are various places of worship utilized in ATR, but they are determined by the particular tribe and the particular need. Additionally, there are no religious leaders in ATR. Some tribes and clans will have priests and others who help in cultic practices, but again, this varies from tribe to tribe without any type of consistency. Instead of being a systemized religion, ATR is basically a loose set of religious principles that are a part of the holistic worldview of traditional Africans across the entire continent. These principles vary from tribe to tribe, but there are similarities across all tribes. Also, these principles are interwoven into the fabric of the culture and worldview of every African person to varying degrees. This makes ATR very slippery to hold on to and understand, and it also means that ATR is laying just under the surface of each person's outward beliefs and religious allegiances. Instead of being a religious system that is adhered to, it is more of an understanding of why and how the world works. African cosmology. Cosmology is the study of how the world began. ATR and the African worldview have a definite answer for this. ATR is an interesting mix of monotheism and animism. While most traditional Africans are animists and look fearfully to the spirit world and the spirits of their ancestors for guidance and help, they still recognize a creator God. Unlike other animists, Africans universally believe in a single God who is all-powerful and all-knowing, and who created everything, including man. Each tribe has its own story of creation and its own story of where creation began. All over Africa, there are places, each of which is considered to be the sacred city, the sacred grove, or the sacred spot, especially because it is believed, according to the people's cosmology, that the place is the center of the world, the place where creation began, where the human race has its cradle, and from where the race dispersed all over the earth. In the majority of the creation myths in Africa, the story is told of God who created all things on the earth, including man and animals. In most of the stories, God sees and loves his creation, but he is either indifferent, fearful, or angry with man. In most of the stories, God placed man in the world, and either man discovered fire and burned the bush, or he killed and ate other animals, which caused God to dislike and distrust man. God then either punishes man, or in many cases he runs away from man and goes to the heavens. There is a sense in each creation story that God is unhappy with man, and that he is distant and disinterested in the affairs of man. So while there is a close connection to Christian cosmology, that a single, all-powerful, omniscient, and omnipresent God created the world, there is also a perspective that God is far away, and that he is unconcerned with the day-to-day affairs of mankind. He is a God who will punish, and he is a God who can help if he chooses to, but often he is too far away to be reached, and so it is necessary for extraordinary measures to be taken to get God's attention. Thus, in African cosmology, there is what Hebert called the excluded middle, which is a host of ancestral spirits, angels, demons, clan spirits, nature spirits, and magical forces that are very close and very present, which one must appeal to in order to get to God. Many have termed this as animism, and it is why Africans can be monotheists, believing in one God, but still be animists who worship the beings in the excluded middle. Influence of animism. Van Reenen defines animism as the belief that personal spiritual beings and impersonal spiritual forces have power over human affairs, and consequently that human beings must discover what beings and forces are influencing them to determine future action and frequently to manipulate their power. He goes on to explain that beings vary from culture to culture but include personal spirits that include God, God's ancestors, ghosts, clan spirits, nature spirits, angels, demons, and Satan. Forces are impersonal powers that include magic, astrology, witchcraft, the evil eye, etc. Animism, and especially ancestral spirits, is very important in the African worldview and African traditional religion, because this is the only way to navigate the spirit world and get to the God who can change things. Instead of appealing directly to God, most African animists will appeal to ancestral spirits or other supernatural beings to appeal to God on their behalf. Whenever there is a problem in daily life, there is a spiritual reason for that problem. There is no such thing as coincidence or chance like is typical for most Westerners. There is a spiritual cause behind the problem, and so there is a need for a spiritual solution. Many times this will involve going to an African witch doctor or diviner who can discover who or what is the cause behind your problem, and then they will prescribe some kind of traditional medicine or use some magical means to solve the problem or give you power over what is harming you. This animistic aspect of traditional African culture flavors everything that Africans believe and experience. There is an openness to the spirit world and to the influence it has on everyday affairs that is unparalleled in the West. Most Westerners mistakenly live a dualistic life with a distinct delineation between the sacred and the secular. When they think of spiritual things, it relates to life after their death, not the influence of the afterlife in their current daily life. Africans, on the other hand, have a very holistic perspective on life where the spiritual realm is just as important, perhaps more so, as the physical realm. There really are not two realms at all, but one, the present realm, where a thin veil separates the living and the dead. They think in terms of the living dead, who are those people who have died, but their spirits remain involved in day-to-day human affairs. Then there are the unborn living, where the spirits of deceased ancestors influence, or in some cases actually inhabit, newborn babies so that those babies carry on the name and spirit of the deceased. This African perspective on the spirit world and its influence and connection to everyday life make a profound impact on African culture, African religion, and even interpretation of the Bible. This worldview, which recognizes a multitude of spirit beings and ascribes mystical powers to objects, extends to every sphere of the African's life. It determines his relationships within the family, his relationship to the land on which he lives, and his relationship to the tribe to which he belongs. When looking carefully at how society functions in these spheres of life, lineage, land, tribe, it becomes clear that in each one a spiritual power is in ultimate control, ancestor spirits, gods of land and tribe. This unseen power is the ultimate originator and guardian of the traditions, taboos, rituals, and other laws that govern this sphere of life. It will bring bad luck, sickness, accidents, social strife, natural disasters, etc., to those who ignore or transgress these traditions. With such a far-reaching impact on everyday life, It is easy to see how this religious, circus, cultural worldview would influence one's perspective on Christianity and the Bible. Grebe and Font go on to say that this perspective produces fear, bondage, and superficial solutions to felt needs. Christianity grew, they say, because it provided the answer to how man could relate to the supreme God. Jesus Christ bridged the gap across the excluded middle between God and man and helped man get to God. However, while early missionaries who brought the gospel answered the big question about a relationship with God and eternal life, they often failed to answer the questions about everyday life. From the African worldview, the ancestors and the spirits of the excluded middle have the power to regulate the affairs of everyday life. So many Africans have merged African traditional religion with Christianity and created a condition called syncretism. Syncretism is the blending of Christian beliefs and practices with those of the dominant culture so that Christianity loses its distinctiveness and speaks with a voice reflective of its culture. Christianity does answer the everyday problems of life, but the historical emphasis on the big questions to the exclusion of the everyday left a gap that was filled by African traditional religion. This does not mean that African Christianity should not be African. It just simply means that when one shapes his Christianity with the culture to the point where it is no longer biblical, then syncretism has occurred. This refers to the supracultural truths of Christianity that are always true for all people. This does not refer to the forms of Christian expression, for while the supracultural truths will remain constant from culture to culture, the forms or expressions of those truths may vary depending on the cultural context. In some ways, African culture is very consistent with biblical Christianity. However, in other areas, there are significant disconnects, and those disconnects have led to syncretism, an openness to false religions and expressions of Christianity that are more culturally African than biblically Christian. Examples of these disconnects include the cosmological perspective. In the biblical model, there is a spirit world that operates alongside God and man, but that spirit world is limited to angels and demons, with the spirits of those who have departed either going to heaven or hell. As has been stated, in the African model there are a variety of spiritual beings between God and people. Instead of embracing the biblical model, Africans have added angels and demons to their cosmology along with all the other spirits. Some of this was fueled by ineffective Bible translation and an assumption that maybe the biblical perspective brought by early missionaries was just the spirits of their world and not the African one. Another example is the relational nature of African culture and the importance of mediators. Historically, for Africans, ancestral spirits were the mediators between God and man, and now Jesus has been introduced. Does this make him another ancestral spirit, or does that negate the presence of the ancestors in daily life? Additionally, there are proven methods from witch doctors that have been relied on for years. This leads the African to wonder, could this knowledge be from God? And what is the difference between magic and Western medicine? A final example is the importance of action and works in the African worldview. As a shame/honor and fear/power-driven culture, the African worldview is often about doing the right things to get the right results and avoiding the wrong things, taboos, in order to avoid punishment from the spirits. The concept of grace is a difficult one for the typical African, and the fabric of their society is interwoven with ideas of punishment for wrongdoing and avoidance of punishment if one does what is expected. No one is an individual, and individualism is not rewarded. The importance of community in religious life and the importance of following the rules lead many to struggle with the concept of grace, which is a founding principle of biblical Christianity. These examples, and many more, often lead the African to seek a religious expression that is more consistent with his culture than what is being offered by many evangelicals. While there are many erroneous religious expressions that have been fueled by the African cultural and religious worldview, this volume will limit its scope to three particular ones: Islam, Roman Catholicism, and Neo-Pentecostalism, especially the prosperity gospel. The failure of traditional biblical Christianity to answer the everyday issues of life has caused Africans to default to their traditional perspectives, and these perspectives mesh well with these three religious perspectives. These three erroneous religious perspectives are so pronounced in Africa because they easily dovetail with African culture, and they do not ask the culture to change in any way. One can be fully African and follow their perspective without any cultural adjustment. However, biblical Christianity, when correctly contextualized, will allow the African to be free in African expression in areas of culture that are consistent with the Bible, but will force the true believer to reject those areas of their culture that are inconsistent with the Bible. For many, this is the rub.